Hey, I'm Aisha. You can now watch UCF TV 24 hours a day on Bright House Digital Channel 1.
Hello and welcome to the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bercia, Special Assistant to the President for Global Perspectives at UCF. Our guest today is Rob Gifford, London correspondent for NPR and formerly China correspondent for NPR and the author of a book, China Road. Welcome, Rob Gifford.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about your experiences in China. You were there for a number of years and now you've written a book. What was it like in a nutshell?
Oh, wow. Hard to summarize, really, such a huge country. In a nutshell, I'd say it's in complete transformation. It's a great time to be a reporter in China because it's undergoing this massive convulsive change from socialism, state socialism, to a market economy, no political reform as yet, but it's starting to have to look at that. So socially, economically, politically, in some ways, it's just in this amazing time of change. And so everywhere you go, you're surprised by what's happening. And literally, there's never a dull day in China at the moment.
Now, there are some people who claim they understand China and others who say it confuses them. Which one is right?
Definitely I'm in the latter category. I think the longer you stay in China, the more confused you get. I mean, I often say if you're not confused about China, then you simply haven't been paying attention, because if you've been paying attention, you'll see that there's a socialist market economy. I mean, even to use that phrase is an oxymoron, is a completely contradictory thing. So I think we should be confused about China. It is a time when you have this one-party state that doesn't allow political dissent, but at the same time you have this amazing market economy with a lot of social mobility, a lot of economic mobility. And so I think that's the danger really in looking at China from the West, is that we start, if we start to think, oh, we really understand China, because it's impossible to encapsulate China and to describe it in a neatly summed up little box, because it is everything. Everything that's true about China is equally untrue about China somewhere else, and vice versa.
Well, tell us a little bit about how the experience compared and contrasted at the end of your time there with the beginning, which was in an earlier period of the Chinese experiment.
Well, I first went there as an undergraduate in the 1980s. I was at college in Britain, and my sophomore year was spent in Beijing in language study in 1987. And so then it was just really pulling out of Maoism. It was less than a decade into its economic experiment, and it was really, you know, the legacy of Mao was still relatively strong. When I moved back for NPR in 1999, already there had been a transformation economically after Tiananmen Square and the killings in Tiananmen Square in '89. Basically, the government did a deal with the people of China, and it said, look, stay out of politics, and you can do anything you want. And really, the Chinese people bought the deal, and they said, okay, we'll stay out of politics, and we'll go full speed ahead to make money. And that's what they did. And so the last 20 years is really a history of that, of no political reform, but massive economic reform. And so China now, 25 years after, nearly 25 years after I first went there, is really an economically transformed country. The big question now is, will that lead on to some kind of political reform?
When you think about the anniversary of, you mentioned Tiananmen Square, the anniversary in '99, and now we have the 20-year anniversary coming up, do you think there will be much of a response, much of a recollection of the event today versus a decade ago?
I think probably even less than a decade ago. Of course, there were many people involved in it who will remember it, but now you have a whole generation a whole generation have grown up not knowing anything about it within China, because of course it's been airbrushed out of history. It's not taught in Chinese schools. I've talked to many youngsters in China who don't even know that it happened. And so that generation is very much focusing on economic issues. That's not to say it'll be forgotten. As I say, many people took part. Many people were very sad when it was crushed so brutally. But I think that the government has managed to persuade a lot of people that what matters is economic, and that what people should be doing is focusing on economic change. And there's no denying, I mean, we have to give some credit to the Communist Party, reluctantly maybe, in some ways because of their other political policies, but they have managed to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And there's no denying that that has happened. The trouble is, it's come at a very high cost, politically, certainly in '89, in bloodshed, but since then also in just the way that they have prevented and continue to prevent any kind of political expression.
Much of the legitimacy of the party today is based on its economic success. What happens in a time of turmoil such as the one we're in right now, where the recession is worldwide and China has shown signs of faltering as well?
That's an excellent question, and in many ways that is the question actually for China now, because as you say, they have been able to, if you like, buy off the populace with economic reform and with economic progress. And people, it's not just in China, in other countries, people are prepared to put up with a lot of corruption, a lot of problems, a lot of a high cost, personal cost to progress, if their own individual economic circumstances are getting better every day. And that's what's happened in China. The problem is, if that now stops, that someone has calculated that they need to create more than 20 million jobs every year, new jobs every year, in order to absorb the new people coming into the workforce, coming from the paddy fields into the cities. That's a lot of jobs. If you are not able to create those jobs, and not just unable to create new jobs, but if factories are laying off workers, as they are, because of the decrease in demand in the West for these products, you've got a big problem on your hands, because those people, and we've already seen it, they are, if they're angry enough, they will come out, and they are coming out onto the streets and protesting. And this is why the Chinese government has announced this massive stimulus package, $600 billion to go into building infrastructure projects, creating jobs, pouring money into the system, and trying to tide it over to get it through this economic downturn, when exports, the basis of the Chinese economic miracle, have been in decline.
And I would imagine it's problematic for those who have been brought into the realm of the haves in recent years, those hundreds of millions you talked about, if suddenly they aren't part of the economic miracle. But what about the billion other Chinese who are still in the have-not category? Are they going to be patient through a period of recession, or are they going to be even angrier?
On one level, they have no choice, because it is still a one-party state. And we shouldn't underestimate, despite all the economic and social transformation of China, we shouldn't underestimate, it is still a one-party state. It is not the old police state. There are more freedoms socially and economically, but it can still be a police state when it wants to be. So in terms of how much they can protest, there is a limit in terms of what how much they'll be allowed. Having said that, though, their position, those billion people, or maybe 800 million, still a lot of people, those people, they are crucial. What the government is trying to do now is to make them start to spend, make them start to contribute more to the development of the Chinese economy. What has happened is urban China has zoomed ahead, rural China has been left behind, and part of that has been problems with land use. You know, you can't get a loan against your land. The land belongs to the state. Everyone's so concerned because there's no health care, so people save 60% of their salary in case they get sick. The government is now trying to reform healthcare, to give people some kind of free healthcare. They're trying to give give back the socialist safety net, so that people in the countryside will start to spend more and start to participate more and have more confidence to become part of the market economy, which is very much part of what China needs now, to shift away from this export model where everything comes from exports and start to become a more consumer-based society, a mature, much more mature society like Western countries that create where the economy is dependent much more on consumer consumption.
Much of the attention during the reform period has been on economic change, and at the same time political change and change in other areas is important. What is your assessment of the progress that's been made specifically in the area of political change? And I'm thinking even more specifically about village elections, and those came about right at the time Tiananmen Square was happening and subsequently. And are those a development that you see as significant, or is something that will eventually translate to higher levels?
It's a big question. I mean, I think they were very real. I mean, obviously the government liked to use those village elections to say, hey, we are making political reforms. The problem is the villages don't really matter. They matter for the local people, but they're not part of the broader structure of the Chinese government. The level above the villages, the townships, is where the Communist Party, where control really matters. So they have had some reforms. They're just scared, I think, of letting it go any further up. And it's very difficult because the legacy, not just Communist Party legacy of one-party rule, but just Chinese cultural legacy. It's not just the Communist Party, it's the whole Confucian system for thousands of years. So to try and implement any kind of reforms is very, very difficult politically. And the government is scared, I think, that if they unleash any kind of political reform like that and allow it to go further up the system, they could set in process some kind of train of events that they then would not be able to control. A little bit like Mikhail Gorbachev. He started some kind of political reform. Everyone thought, fantastic, we'll have some of this. And it all unleashed something that then got out of his control. And I think the Communist Party is right to be afraid of that. That could happen. And so the problem is now is that they're stuck. They know they need to reform. They know they must reform just for the efficiency of the state, just for the efficiency of how it works, and just for the benefit of the people. But they're afraid that it could get out of control. So that's the big question now for China. There is a crunch coming, I think, and it just depends when it comes, and it depends whether the Chinese government can start to set up the new pillars of a new political house in advance, or if it's going to be forced upon it by something that comes out of the blue, maybe a real economic crisis or some kind of political challenge or something like that.
When you get together with other China watchers and China scholars and they make an attempt to peer into the future and see what might happen to China half a century down the road, and they talk in terms of a big Taiwan model and a status quo model and a regression model, which of those do you tend toward and why?
I generally say, and obviously like all people who watch China, everyone's kind of reluctant to make predictions about the future. With that caveat, I'm short-term optimistic, long-term pessimistic. I think they can continue to finance their inefficiencies for a while. They've got a lot of money in the bank. They've got one-party control, as I say. I think they can keep that going for a while, but I fear that when the crunch comes, I am worried that they cannot make that transition just because it's too difficult. I mean, you mentioned Taiwan. Taiwan made the transition. So did South Korea. You know, economic reform, a new middle class, demands for political reform, which are then met. Taiwan and South Korea are now democracies. But Taiwan is 22 million people. You know, that's smaller than the smallest Chinese province. And you're dealing with a country in China that is the size of the United States. There's a whole bunch of people there, the Tibetans, the Muslims of the Northwest, who don't even want to be a part of the country. I just think, and on top of that, you've got hundreds of millions of people. Taiwan can create its middle class very quickly. bring people in from the fields, and they get a job in the city. When you've got 1.3 billion people, that takes decades and decades. So I fear that it's going to be very difficult for China to do that. I think it can carry on for a while, but when the crunch comes, as I say, I think it needs to have started along the road to political reform. Otherwise, the Chinese history tells us that the danger is that if the government collapses, the country collapses, if you haven't set up something to replace it.
Talk about the triangular relationship involving China, the United States, and Taiwan. That has been central to the security and stability of East Asia in particular for more than half a century. Where do you think it's going to go now? We have a new administration in the United States, a relatively new administration in Taiwan, and the continuing reform process in China itself. Is this pushing developments in the right direction?
I think after the 8 years of Chen Shui-bian's presidency in Taiwan, everyone's sort of just breathing a slight sigh of relief in many parts, especially of Washington and Beijing, that Ma Ying-jeou, seen as a much more stable, much more safe pair of hands, has become president. And I think there's a sense in which everyone is kind of thinking, okay, let's just keep the status quo, keep it as it is. The problem was, because I think people can deal with the status quo, the problem was the fear that Chen Shui-bian, the previous president, wanted to change the status quo. And so I think there is a real possibility that we could, in 5-10 years' time, be in the same situation with Taiwan, just with an understanding that there are close economic links, but no political links. I think that a lot of people in Taiwan will continue to be very skeptical about any kind of political links with the mainland as long as China is ruled by a communist party. I don't really see that going anywhere politically because the Taiwanese people fought for decades to become a democracy themselves. So I think over the next 2 administrations within the United States, I think there will just be this emphasis on stability, on keeping the relationship calm, and I think the Chinese themselves have realized this is a long-term problem. There's no point in trying to force the hand of the Taiwanese, because if you start being pushy and taking any kind of bully boy tactics towards the Taiwanese, they'll just push back and that won't go anywhere. So I feel, the problem is, who knows what's out there? It's a flashpoint. There's no doubt about it. So if you have some kind of economic problem in China where everything goes south and you have massive economic problems in China, who knows if there's a time of instability in China. People have talked about some kind of action against Taiwan as a rallying point for nationalistic Chinese to bring everyone together. Those are very much left field scenarios. Who knows how it could play out? I think the best scenario is that it just continues to be stable and that really the political solution is pushed forward into the future.
You mentioned you were a student in China, and many of our students have sort of their initial experience with China via Chinese students who are studying here. How has the typical Chinese student studying in America changed over the years?
Well, I had a fascinating incident actually recently. Last year I went to give a book talk in Ohio, in a small town, in a university town in Ohio, and I very much illuminated the change that has gone on. I was a student in the 80s in China when there was a big gulf between a 20-year-old Western student and 20-year-old Chinese students. We were very different kinds of people. And I arrived to give this talk in Ohio, and I was met by a Chinese graduate student who I said to her, well, so how is it? You're in America. Wow, it must be great. And she looked at me and she said, 差不多, which in Chinese means it's more or less the same. And it just struck me how amazing that is. She had her iPod and her laptop, and she was just like a Western student, graduate student. She was 24. I think there's just been this convergence in China. As the urban middle class has grown, their kids have grown up in an age of the internet. They're not out on the streets demonstrating for democracy. They are on the internet looking to get a better job, and looking to make money, and all the things that kids in the West want to do. So I think the gap has very much closed in terms of socially, economically, what young people are like. And I think you see that in the universities now. Chinese students, very hardworking, so many of them, are just wanting to get on economically. And some people lament this, that the idealism, the heroism, if you like, of the 1980s has gone. But I think there's a feeling that that's very pragmatic. They want to get a better job and get on with things. And that's what they're doing in coming to America to be graduate students.
Let's talk a little bit about your new book. What were you hoping to accomplish in writing that?
Well, the book is about a journey across China from Shanghai to the Kazakh border. There's one road that goes all the way. It's called Route 312. And I pitched the book, as I pitched the radio series on NPR, as a kind of road movie, a Route 66 kind of journey. I did it by taxi, bus, hitchhiking, and it was really just using the road as a prism to see China. China that's a country on the move, 150 million people migrating to the cities to get better jobs, to find a better life. So it was really using the road, traveling the road over 2 months as a way of looking at this country that is on the move, and also using the journey to look at China's journey and to try and put in a lot of the historical elements into it. So it's not just a travel book, it's trying to bring in my 20 years of study and reporting on China and to answer some of the big questions really about where China is going today, but also to try and introduce the Chinese people to people. I think in the West we have this kind of rather faceless image of China. You know, whether it's the sort of the coolies of the 19th century or the Red Guards of the 1960s, China has always been rather faceless, even to the worker ants, you know, in the factories of southern China today. But Chinese people are just like us. They have the same hopes and fears and loves and hates, and I wanted to really put some names on the faces and to show that they're individuals, that they're people who with families, with ambitions, and in many ways very much like us, and to present China in a very human way. And that's what I've tried to do by traveling this road and just talking to the people along the way and trying to show China on a very much a grassroots level, not through the high diplomacy or the economic policies, but through the people who are Chinese in the early 21st century.
As you wrapped up your time in China, and especially as you completed this book, what was your most enduring impression of China? What affected you, stayed with you more than anything else?
Wow, that's a very difficult question. I suppose I have to say the hope. I think China for so long was the world's economic superpower. It was for so long, hundreds of years ago, the top civilization in the world, leading the world in so many ways with all its inventions that we then adopted. And then for 200 years it really took a nosedive and was really humiliated and semi-colonized by the West. Now what you see in China is finally people having the chance to emerge and to get some kind of economic progress in their own lives, and also to express themselves as individuals. And the hope that is involved in that, it's very, very imperfect. It's very, very difficult. Sometimes it's very brutal and it's very pessimistic. But actually underlying everything, in a way that you don't see in other countries, there is a very, very strong hope that things are going to be better, and that if I am an ordinary Chinese person, can have a better life in a very kind of American dream kind of way. And I think you notice it every day. You notice bad things every day, but you do notice much progress every day. And I think you can't go to China without feeling that. I suppose that's what I would say is the main thing that struck me.
Great. Rob Gifford, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, John.
And thank you for the Global Perspective Show. I'm John Bercia, and we'll see you next time.